This podcast is brought to you by Tor Books. Read The Living Dead by George A. Romero and Daniel Kraus, on sale now wherever books are sold. When George Romero passed away in 2017, New York Times bestselling author Daniel Kraus finished the father of zombie horror's final zombie work. Set in the present day, The Living Dead is an entirely new tale, the story of the zombie plague as George A. Romero wanted to tell it. Joe Hill calls The Living Dead a horror landmark and a work of gory genius.
That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons a podcast shall rise. HP Lovecraft, Weird Tales, Ramsey Campbell, Cthulhu, Laird Barron, Silent Hill, Brian Lumley, Dagon. There's something sinister out there in the cosmos, and the tendrils run deep throughout the universe. Only one woman dares to traverse the web. Mary SanGiovanni, who once again is up to cosmic shenanigans.
Hi folks, welcome to Cosmic Shenanigans. This is Mary SanGiovanni, and I am up to shenanigans once again of cosmic proportions. This week and next week, we're going to do a double Randolph Carter feature where I'm going to read two stories that focus on the character of Randolph Carter in Lovecraft's work. And then we're going to discuss them a little bit and talk about how they are cosmic horror in the grand scheme of things. Not everything Lovecraft did, strangely enough, would be considered cosmic horror by the standards that we've been talking about since the beginning of the show. But two of these particular stories, Randolph Carter in particular as a character, I think make for some interesting insight into how Lovecraft felt about both his own work and how readers were seeing his work even then. So this one is the first appearance of Randolph Carter, and it is the statement of Randolph Carter. I repeat to you, gentlemen, that your inquisition is fruitless. Detain me here forever, if you will. Confine or execute me if you must have a victim to propitiate the illusion you call justice. But I can say no more than I have said already. Everything that I can remember I have told with perfect candor. Nothing has been distorted or concealed, and if anything remains vague, it is only because of the dark cloud which has come over my mind. That cloud and the nebulous nature of the horrors which brought it upon me. Again, I say, I do not know what has become of Harley Warren, though I think, almost hope, that he is in peaceful oblivion, if there be anywhere so blessed a thing. It is true that I have for 5 years been his closest friend, and a partial sharer of his terrible researches into the unknown. I will not deny, though my memory is uncertain and indistinct, that this witness of yours may have seen us together, as he says, on the Gainesville Pike, walking toward Big Cypress Swamp at 11:30 on that awful night. That we bore electric lanterns, spades, and a curious coil of wire with attached instruments, I will even affirm, for these things all played a part in the single hideous scene which remains burned into my shaken recollection. But of what followed, and of the reason I was found alone and dazed on the edge of the swamp next morning, I must insist that I know nothing save what I have told you over and over again. You say to me that there is nothing in the swamp or near it which could form the setting of that frightful episode. I reply that I know nothing beyond what I saw. Vision or nightmare it may have been. Vision or nightmare, I fervently hope it was. Yet it is all that my mind retains of what took place in those shocking hours after we left the sight of men. And why Harley Warren did not return, he, or his shade, or some nameless thing I cannot describe, alone can tell. As I have said before, the weird studies of Harley Warren were well known to me, and to some extent shared by me. Of his vast collection of strange, rare books on forbidden subjects, I have read all that are written in the languages of which I am master. But these are few as compared with those in languages I cannot understand. Most, I believe, are in Arabic, and the fiend-inspired book which brought on the end, the book which he carried in his pocket out of the world, was written in characters whose like I never saw elsewhere. Warren would never tell me just what was in that book. As to the nature of our studies, must I say again that I no longer retain full comprehension? It seems to me rather merciful that I do not, for they were terrible studies, which I pursued more through reluctant fascination than through actual inclination. Warren always dominated me, and sometimes I feared him. I remember how I shuddered at his facial expression on the night before the awful happening, when he talked so incessantly of his theory, why certain corpses never decay, but rest firm and fat in their tombs for 1,000 years. But I do not fear him now, for I suspect that he has known horrors beyond my ken. Now I fear for him. Once more, I say that I have no clear idea of our subject on that night. Certainly, it had much to do with something in the book which Warren carried with him, that ancient book in undecipherable characters which had come to him from India a month before. But I swear I do not know what it was that we expected to find. Your witness says he saw us at 11:30 on the Gainesville Pike, headed for Big Cypress Swamp. This is probably true, but I have no distinct memory of it. The picture seared into my soul as of one scene only, and the hour must have been long after midnight, for a waning crescent moon was high in the vaporous heavens. The place was an ancient cemetery, so ancient that I trembled at the manifold signs of immemorial years. It was in a deep, damp hollow overgrown with rank grass, moss, and curious creeping weeds, and filled with a vague stench which my idle fancy associated absurdly with rotting stone. On every hand were the signs of neglect and decrepitude, and I seemed haunted by the notion that Warren and I were the first living creatures to invade a lethal silence of centuries. Over the valley's rim, a wan, waning crescent moon peered through the noisome vapors that seemed to emanate from unheard-of catacombs, and by its feeble, wavering beams, I could distinguish a repellent array of antique slabs, urns, cenotaphs, and mausoleum facades, all crumbling, moss-grown, and moisture-stained, and partly concealed by the gross luxuriance of the unhealthy vegetation. My first vivid impression of my own presence in this terrible necropolis concerns the act of pausing with Warren before a certain half-obliterated sepulchre, and of throwing down some burdens which we seemed to have been carrying. I now observed that I had with me an electric lantern and 2 spades, whilst my companion was supplied with a similar lantern and a portable telephone outfit. No word was uttered, for the spot and the task seemed known to us, and without delay we seized our spades and commenced to clear away the grass, weeds, and drifted earth from the flat, archaic mortuary. After uncovering the entire surface, which consisted of 3 immense granite slabs, we stepped back some distance to survey the charnel scene, and Warren appeared to make some mental calculations. Then he returned to the sepulchre, and using his spade as a lever, sought to pry up the slab lying nearest to a stony ruin, which may have been a monument in its day. He did not succeed, and motioned to me to come to his assistance. Finally, our combined strength loosened the stone, which we raised and tipped to one side. The removal of the slab revealed a black aperture, from which rushed an effluence of miasmal gases so nauseous that we started back in horror. After an interval, however, we approached the pit again and found the exhalations less unbearable. Our lanterns disclosed the top of a flight of stone steps, dripping with some detestable ichor of the inner earth, and bordered by moist walls encrusted with niter. And now, for the first time, my memory records verbal discourse. Warren addressing me at length in his mellow tenor voice, a voice singularly unperturbed by our awesome surroundings. "I'm sorry to have to ask you to stay on the surface," he said, "but it would be a crime to let anyone with your frail nerves go down there. You can't imagine, even from what you have read and from what I've told you, the things I shall have to see and do. It's fiendish work, Carter, and I doubt if any man, without ironclad sensibilities, could ever see it through and come up alive and sane. I don't wish to offend you, and heaven knows I'd be glad enough to have you with me, but the responsibility is in a certain sense mine, and I couldn't drag a bundle of nerves like you down to probable death or madness. I tell you, you can't imagine what the thing is really like. But I promise to keep you informed over the telephone of every move. You see, I have enough wire here to reach to the center of the earth and back." I can still hear in memory those coolly spoken words, and I can still remember my remonstrances. I seemed desperately anxious to accompany my friend into those sepulchral depths, yet he proved inflexibly obdurate. At one time, he threatened to abandon the expedition if I remained insistent, a threat which proved effective, since he alone held the key to the thing. All this I can still remember, though I no longer know what manner of thing we sought. After he had secured my reluctant acquiescence in his design, Warren picked up the reel of wire and adjusted the instruments. At his nod, I took one of the latter and seated myself upon an aged, discolored gravestone close by the newly uncovered aperture. Then he shook my hand, shouldered the coil of wire, and disappeared within that indescribable ossuary. For a moment I kept sight of the glow of his lantern, and heard the rustle of the wire as he laid it down after him, but the glow soon disappeared abruptly, as if a turn in the stone staircase had been encountered, and the sound died away almost as quickly. I was alone, yet bound to the unknown depths of those magic strands whose insulated surface lay green beneath the struggling beams of that waning crescent moon. In the lone silence of that hoary and deserted city of the dead, my mind conceived the most ghastly fantasies and illusions, and the grotesque shrines and monoliths seemed to assume a hideous personality, a half-sentience. Amorphous shadow seemed to lurk in the darker recesses of the weed-choked hollow, and to flit, as in some blasphemous ceremonial procession, past the portals of the moldering tombs in the hillside. Shadows which could not have been cast by that pallid, peering crescent moon. I constantly consulted my watch by the light of my electric lantern and listened with feverish anxiety at the receiver of the telephone, but for more than a quarter of an hour heard nothing. Then a faint clicking came from the instrument, and I called down to my friend in a tense voice. Apprehensive as I was nevertheless unprepared for the words which came up from that uncanny vault in accents more alarmed and quivering than any I had heard before from Harley Warren. He who had so calmly left me a little while previously now called from below in a shaky whisper more portentous than the loudest shriek. "God, if you could see what I'm seeing." I could not answer. Speechless, I could only wait. Then came the frenzied tones again. "Carter, it's terrible, monstrous, unbelievable." This time my voice did not fail me, and I poured into the transmitter a flood of excited questions. Terrified, I continued to repeat, "Warren, what is it? What is it?" Once more came the voice of my friend, still hoarse with fear, and now apparently tinged with despair. "I can't tell you, Carter. It's too utterly beyond thought. I dare not tell you. No man could know it and live. Great God, I never dreamed of this." Stillness again, save for my now incoherent torrent of shuddering inquiry. Then the voice of Warren in a pitch of wilder consternation. "Carter, for the love of God, put back the slab and get out of this if you can. Quick! Leave everything else and make for the outside. It's your only chance. Do as I say, and don't ask me to explain." I heard, yet was able only to repeat my frantic questions. Around me were the tombs and the darkness and the shadows. Below me some peril beyond the radius of the human imagination. But my friend was in greater danger than I, and though my fear, I felt a vague resentment that he should deem me capable of deserting him under such circumstances. More clicking, and after a pause, a piteous cry from Warren. "Beat it! For God's sake, put the slab back and beat it, Carter." Something in the boyish slang of my evidently stricken companion unleashed my faculties. I formed and shouted resolution. "Warren, brace up, I'm coming down." But at this offer, the tone of my auditor changed to a scream of utter despair. "Don't! You can't understand. It's too late. And my own fault. Put back the slab and run. There's nothing else you or anyone can do now." The tone changed again, this time acquiring a softer quality as of hopeless resignation. Yet it remained tense through anxiety for me. "Quick, before it's too late." I tried not to heed him, tried to break the paralysis which held me, and to fulfill my vow to rush down to his aid. But his next whisper found me still inert in the chains of stark horror. "Carter! Hurry! It's no use. You must go. Better one than two. The slab!" A pause, more clicking than the faint voice of Warren. "Nearly over now. Don't make it harder. Cover up those damn steps and run for your life. You're losing time. So long, Carter. Won't see you again." Here Warren's whisper swelled into a cry that gradually rose to a shriek, fraught with all the horror of the ages. "Curse these hellish things! Legions, my God! Beat it! Beat it! Beat it!" After that was silence. I know not how many interminable eons I sat stupefied, whispering, muttering, calling, screaming into that telephone. Over and over again, through those eons, I whispered and muttered, called, shouted, and screamed, "Warren! Warren, answer me! Are you there?" And then there came to me the crowning horror of all, the unbelievable, unthinkable, almost unmentionable thing. I have said that eons seemed to elapse after Warren shrieked forth his last despairing warning, and that only my own cries now broke the hideous silence. But after a while there was a further clicking in the receiver, and I strained my ears to listen. Again I called down, "Warren, are you there?" And in answer heard the thing which has brought this cloud over my mind. I do not try, gentlemen, to account for that thing, that voice, nor can I venture to describe it in detail, since the first words took away my consciousness and created a mental blank which reaches to the time of my awakening in the hospital. Shall I say that the voice was deep, hollow, gelatinous, remote, unearthly, inhuman, disembodied? What shall I say? It was the end of my experience, and is the end of my story. I heard it and knew no more. Heard it as I sat petrified in that unknown cemetery in the hollow, amidst the crumbling stones and the falling tombs, the rank vegetation and the miasmal vapors. Heard it well up from the innermost depths of that damnable open sepulchre, as I watched amorphous, necrophagous shadows dance beneath an accursed waning moon. And this is what it said. "You fool. Warren is dead." All right, now let's pause for a word from our sponsor, and then we'll be back to chit-chat about the statement of Randolph Carter.
This podcast is brought to you by Tor Books. Read The Living Dead by George A. Romero and Daniel Kraus, on sale now wherever books are sold. When George Romero passed away in 2017, New York Times bestselling author Daniel Kraus finished the father of zombie horror's final zombie work. Set in the present day, The Living Dead is an entirely new tale, the story of the zombie plague as George A. Romero wanted to tell it. Joe Hill calls The Living Dead a horror landmark and a work of gory genius.
Okay, so the Statement of Randolph Carter was written in December 1919. It was first published in The Vagrant in May 1920, and then was reprinted in Weird Tales in 1925. Now, one of the reasons I picked the Randolph Carter stories is that in some of his work, not everything is on an immediately obvious cosmic scale. But I think that Lovecraft ties it all together because the unknown and unknowable suggests a rootwork of cosmic proportions, this sort of network of horror that extends far beyond the little piece that we can see. And that idea, that theme is pervasive through, I think, a lot of the Randolph Carter tales. Even the idea of something being underground, where we have extensive root systems, labyrinths, we can't see through the dirt, and there are, miles of the unseeable and the unknowable right under our feet. So I think sometimes Lovecraft uses a lot of subterranean settings for that reason, that there is this sense of not just the extensiveness of the potential underground, but also that the horror is something that we are as entrenched in as we are being on this planet, that it is under our feet, in the air that we breathe, in the oceans from which we take sustenance, that it's everywhere, and that it is pervasive throughout the natural world. We do have this sense of hopelessness in the face of horrors. I think it's interesting to see things through Randolph Carter's eyes, because pursuing forbidden knowledge is, I think, an ultimate flaw in Randolph's character. But in this particular story, we see him being very inexperienced, not particularly wise. I mean, if somebody said, run, this thing is awful, it's going to kill you, you'd think that you would do that. But I think that a lot of things which he feels characterizes him as a man kind of left him torn. Should he go down there and rescue his friend? Should he stay with his friend, despite the fact that his friend is saying, no, you've got to run, you've got to run? We see sort of a person who, despite multiple encounters with the great unknown, still continues to survive. Lovecraft uses him, I don't want to quite say as a Mary Sue, but he does seem to use Randolph Carter as something of a stand-in for his own experiences, I guess as a stand-in to explore the occult and the supernatural through a character that is probably not unlike Lovecraft. Maybe more so in this early version of Randolph Carter. Harley Warren, his friend, says that he's a bundle of nerves and that's why he can't take him underground. Now, we wonder exactly about that because, as I mentioned, Randolph Carter is one of the few characters that Lovecraft allows to continue to survive despite multiple interactions with that. And we're going to come back to why I think that is. But as I mentioned, we also have this hopelessness, the fact that we are drawn inevitably and inexorably to whatever the horror is. I think that hopelessness is a key nihilistic characteristic of a lot of Lovecraft's work in relation to the great beyond. That whatever we find out is basically going to leave us without purpose and without a sense of hope or a sense of human resistance or resiliency. Even the fact that he's in legal trouble at the beginning of this, Randolph Carter's being interviewed by the police, and even the legal trouble sort of suggests symbolically that we're just gears in a machine. It's a technique, I think, for dwarfing the significance of the individual experience, because here we have, and this is used a lot in horror, we have a character who has experienced something that, could theoretically border on the criminal, the territory of the police. We have a disappearance, possibly a murder, and the only witness, or the witnesses put Randolph Carter at the scene as the last person who has seen Harley Warren, and yet part of his explanation seems too fantastic to believe, and he can't remember the rest. And that's where I think we get into the idea of insanity in this particular story is replaced with a fog of forgetting. There is a type of mental condition called a fugue state, which causes people to have amnesia on a fairly large scale. They forget everything. Sometimes these people wander off, actually, and start new lives because some stressor has caused them to block out all of their knowledge and recollection of their life as it is, including who they are. And we have something of that in this, that whatever happened between the time that this creature spoke to Randolph Carter and the time that he woke up in the hospital was so traumatizing that it has wiped his memory. That what he could recall, that the story that we got is still only pieces of the greater picture. Now, he mentions that, and he mentions it more than once in the story, that you'd think that this forgetting would be a blessing. That he hopes that Harley Warren is in a place of oblivion, where he would be at peace because there would be nothing. And I do think that does contribute to a worldview that Lovecraft would have had, a sort of atheistic worldview that once you died, the best you can hope for is sort of peaceful oblivion. But whether Lovecraft realized it or not, I don't think that Randolph Carter's being unable to remember is completely a blessing. For one thing, it leaves Carter defenseless with the police because he can't remember the whole story. And I think police are always very skeptical of people who claim, I don't remember what happened. It's also implied, I think, that this forgetting leaves Carter defenseless against whatever took Warren, because now this thing is aware that Carter exists as well. And, we've discussed in the past that in cosmic horror, a lot of times these entities, as powerful and terrible as they are mostly that because we get their attention, that they wouldn't be as, they'd be like a black hole out in the middle of the universe somewhere, not nearly as dangerous until they actually discover that we exist. And then whether that's something, it would be like entering the event horizon of these creatures. I do think, however, that despite the fact that sometimes only knowing part of something or the suggestion of something, sometimes I think that's far more terrifying and anxiety-causing than knowing all of it and facing it head-on. But I do think that this is a saving grace for Randolph Carter. So Lovecraft seldom ever has anyone survive after knowing the great cosmic picture. Once somebody knows everything, usually those people, the full realization leads to madness, suicide, drug addiction. The only people who do survive are people that don't face this monster head on, or this great horror head on, with the exception of the scholars in the Dunwich Horror, which we've discussed before. But mostly if they run from it, or if they are not fully aware of everything, of what it all means, of what it is exactly that the great reveal is. This seems to be the only thing keeping them alive. And in Randolph Carter's case, I feel like that's kind of his saving grace, is that he only knows part of the story all the time. And that he even mentions that he doesn't pursue occult knowledge out of inclination, but more out of reluctant fascination. It's almost like early on, when he was younger, he was easily swayed by people like Harley Warren to try something new, to check out these sort of esoteric occult fascinations, and that having been introduced to this, he's now a part of this world. But he also recognizes that the more distance he can maintain with this world, the safer he is, which is very strange for a Lovecraftian main character, who usually to the point of destruction, will pursue a field of knowledge or a thread of knowledge. As I mentioned, a lot of the people who do know, who do have a full realization of this stuff, they go insane. They are planning suicide after they write their final letter. They are addicted to drugs. And I think all of this suggests a certain Lovecraft worldview that perhaps he believed in the inherent weakness of the human mind and soul to handle the implications of the full cosmic horror picture unfolded before them. And I think this, again, suggests the futility of human existence and individual accomplishment, comprehension, and understanding. That Lovecraft didn't quite trust people to be able to handle the bigger picture, and that in knowing it, it would destroy us. And I think, again, it just sort of reinforces this idea of a weakness that human beings have, that they can't comprehend the greater universal truths. So this, I think, does fit neatly into Lovecraft's canon of cosmic horror, but in a slightly different way. You know, I think it doesn't seem like it's cosmic scale, but I do think that Lovecraft kind of tied everything together in his work as being all part of a bigger picture. And it does have the other elements, I think, that Lovecraft was so well known for, in terms of the nihilism and hopelessness of the human race's existence and persistence in the face of these greater horrors. Now, next week, we're going to revisit Randolph Carter after he's had more experience. And in that story in particular, I think Lovecraft addresses something that we often, even now, give Lovecraft a hard time about the thing which cannot be described or cannot be named. And he talks a little bit about, I think, why that is and how that is. So thanks again for listening this week. And I will, if you are interested in listening to other episodes of Cosmic Shenanigans or another podcast that I co-host, The Horror Show with Brian Keene, you can find them all at Brian Keene Radio / podcast. If you go to his website, briankeene.com, and click on the radio podcast link, it will take you to all the episodes of not just Cosmic Shenanigans, but The Horror Show with Brian Keene, Grindcast, which is our engineer Matt Wildeson's podcast, as well as Defenders Dialogue, which is another, and a couple other shows on the network. It's really great, plus lots of great music. So check that out, and I will see you next week. Bye.
This podcast is brought to you by Tor Books. Read The Living Dead by George A. Romero and Daniel Kraus, on sale now wherever books are sold. When George Romero passed away in 2017, New York Times best-selling author Daniel Kraus finished the father of zombie horror's final zombie work. Set in the present day, The Living Dead is an entirely new tale, the story of the zombie plague as George A. Romero wanted to tell it. Joe Hill calls The Living Dead a horror landmark and a work of gory genius.
Cosmic Shenanigans is a production of the Brian Keene Radio Network. You can listen to this episode and all previous episodes for free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play Music, and wherever else podcasts are available. Cosmic Shenanigans is written and produced by Mary SanGiovanni. Our theme music is by Xander Harris. Our engineer is Matt Wilderson. Check out his books on Amazon.com. If you enjoyed this show, you might enjoy our other podcasts, The Horror Show with Brian Keene, Defenders Dialogue, and Grindcast. To advertise on Cosmic Shenanigans, visit briankeene.com and click Podcasts.